Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Wednesday, February the 19th, and sorry that it's taken a bit longer to get on this morning, but just having some technical difficulties. I don't know where you are, but maybe the storm, the windstorm, has something to do with it, but everything was pretty slow in getting started today. So just want to welcome you this Wednesday, February 19th, as we continue our study in Casket Empty, a look through this whole redemptive story of the Bible throughout the scriptures. Today, we're in week 16, which is all about the exile to Babylon. And I thought I would give everybody just a brief introduction here to some of the events that are taking place. We've come to the end of a study, and we find ourselves now with the last few kings, just again in the southern kingdom, demonstrating a great deal of rebelliousness against God's will and purposes, to the extent that Assyria has already overcome the northern kingdom, and the southern kingdom of Israel is about to be overrun by Babylon. It's had some very tumultuous days as it had to contend with Assyria, making inroads into Judea. It had to deal with an alliance that was formulated between Assyria to the north and Egypt to the south. They were putting the squeeze on Israel as well. And so you find that while there is wars and rumors of wars, nothing's going to compare to Babylon when Babylon comes in. And not only are they going to defeat Assyria, they're going to defeat the Egyptians, and then Babylon is going to take over completely, and they're going to wind up destroying Jerusalem. It's going to destroy the temple and all of its surroundings. Everything is going to be burnt to the ground, reduced to rubble, and all of the articles that were a part of the temple worship will be stolen, taken away, and brought back to Babylon. So, as you can see, boy, this is a terrible, terrible time in Israel's history, which is why I also want you to think a little bit about what also is going on during this particular time, because as we do, what I would like for you to really just keep in mind here is is the fact that while Israel is going through all these changes, they are going to be like as I said, they're going to be overrun by Babylon. Now, that's not going to happen just in one fell sweep. In 605, they're going to come, and this is the story where Daniel begins. Daniel is one of the earlier deportees from Judea and Jerusalem. We took a look yesterday, right? Daniel, one of the favored classes in Judea, one of the ruling class there. They take him. They figure if they can take a number of these young men and inculcate them with the traditions of Babylon, that they would become faithful servants to them. But they didn't know what they were getting in Daniel, because Daniel's first allegiance is to God. And you begin to see that in the opening chapter, where Daniel is already resisting Babylon's efforts to conform him more and more to their image. And so Daniel restrains. And even though Daniel is living in this foreign land, oppressed by these foreign rulers, Daniel still stands strong. And the lesson that we get out of this, right, is that when a person gives himself to pleasing God, God will be pleased to give to him. And so God raises up Daniel and provides Daniel with opportunities to have a far-reaching impact for the future of Israel, so that the promises of God are going to continue, even though at this time Israel is going to be carried off into exile. You read that, for instance, in Jeremiah, in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 29. Why don't you turn there with me for a moment, right? So look at Jeremiah and 29. This is a very familiar text, and I'd like to read it for you this morning. This comes as part of a letter that the prophet Jeremiah sent to Jerusalem, to the surviving elders among the exiles, and to the priests, the prophets, and all the other people Nebuchadnezzar had carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. So you see, this is giving you an historical setting. There are some who survived this first, wave of the Babylonian assault. This was about 605. Another one is going to come in 597, right? So about another 10 years, and then in that invasion, they're going to wind up taking Ezekiel. So the first wave in 605 captures Daniel and brings him to Babylon. In 597, they're going to take Ezekiel, and Ezekiel's going to be back. And I mentioned those two because they are the names of two of the books in your Bibles that are giving you a reference to this particular period of time when there is the tumultuousness of war. People are being, absconded from their land. Everything just seems so dark. The judgment of God is being met out. And so here it's saying during this period of time, we also know, just to finish this little trend of thought, 605, they take Daniel away. 597, they take Ezekiel away. In 586, the whole city is going to be laid waste. That's the final exile where Babylon comes over and just takes complete charge. So this is, while there is still some of the leadership here and the totality of Babylon's rule has not yet come into full effect. There's this letter that the prophet Jeremiah sends to Jerusalem, to the surviving elders among the exiles, and to the peoples, to the prophets and all the people Nebuchadnezzar had carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Now, it gives you another little historical point. It says this was after King Jehoiachin and the queen mother, the court officials and the leader of Judah and Jerusalem, the craftsmen and the artisans had gone into exile from Jerusalem. So see, this is towards the end now of the king. So he entrusted the letter to Elisha, son of Shaphan, and to Gemariah, son of Hilkiah, whom Zedekiah, king of Judah, sent to Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. So Zedekiah, last king in the southern kingdom of Israel. So this is coming to the very end now, and there is nothing but judgment that is on the horizon. You get the picture, right? Very, very bleak. And so let's pick it up at verse 4. It says, this is what the Lord Almighty says, right? The God of Israel says to those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. So God has a word for those who are going to be carried off into exile. You have a tendency to think that in all of this darkness, where's God? Like, why is this happening? But he has been telling them all along why this has been happening. They have broken covenant with God. And it was a serious thing. You might think, come on, just get over it. No, well, that's not how this works. God is holy, God is just, and he has been demonstrating that throughout Israel's history. He's also slow to anger, quick to listen, quick to show compassion. But there comes a point when God says judgment is coming because they had refused his hands and his grace. And this is one of those moments. So listen to the word that God sends to the exiles in Babylon. He says, I want you to build houses and settle down. I want you to plant gardens and eat what they produce. I want you to marry and have sons and daughters. I want you to find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number, do not decrease. So he's encouraging them to be fruitful and multiply, even while they are in Babylon. So the fact that they're in Babylon doesn't mean that God is absent, right? It still means that God is very much a part of this whole equation. He's giving them insight into how they are to live while they are there. And so, and not only are they to marry and settle down and increase in number, but notice what he says here in verse 7. He says, I want you to seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Well, aren't they in Babylon? They're no longer in Judea. They're no longer in Jerusalem. The covenant promise that God gave to them about this land that they were about to inherit. God says, listen, if you honor me, I'm going to honor you, right? There's blessings when you hold into the covenant, but there's also going to be curses. So when all of this goes down and now the people are being carried off into exile, you would think, well, all bets are off. But that's not how God works. You see, God here is saying, listen, I'm going to be with my people. And even though you have been faithless to me, I'm going to be faithful to you. So if you go into this land and begin to again follow my ways, even if you're in the land of the enemy, I'm telling you right now that I will prosper you. And I want you to pray for the city that it prospers, because if it does, you will prosper too. So here is God's people in a pagan land, overrun by foreign kings, under foreign rule, and God saying, I can still bless you even though you're there. Boy, what about the days in which we're living? Sometimes I hear Christians talk and they're thinking, man, this world is so terrible. You know, I want to leave tomorrow. And we can feel that pain, because everybody, nobody knows that other person's pain except for that person, right? I mean, it's there are things that we share in community, but our mortality is something that is just very, very personal. Recently, I watched this documentary on surviving Black Hawk Down. It was about that, the incident around the times of Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton's term, and it was in Somalia, and how the United States went in as a part of a UN peacekeeping mission to help bring food and supplies, because there was this great, famine that was taking place. Many people were dying, and there was all of these warlords and everything that were fighting for all the food, and it wasn't really getting to the people. And that didn't turn out so well, because after a while, great conflict, happened between the Somalians and the United States, and their role became pretty confused. And there's all kinds of reasons, but the reason why I bring up the story is because this documentary goes back and forth between the United States perspective and then some of the militants on the ground in Somalia. And man, you were thinking that you were listening to two entirely different stories, and the violence that broke out, and it was horrible. And they had all this footage, and I'm just thinking, living in Somalia in those days, man, it was awful. We haven't had to experience that on our own shores here, but I'm just finishing that documentary, and then I'm reading these passages and thinking, okay, if I was overrun and the enemy is all around me now, and I've been forcefully taken from my home, and God's telling me now, hey, listen, I want you to settle down. I want you to pray for this land, because I'll prosper you, and as a result, boy, that would have to be a big shift that would take place in my head right now. because it could be easily filled with hate and a longing for revenge. But notice it goes on, it says, yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. And then he goes on, he says, and don't let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. Well, what does that mean? The diviners, right? They could be deceiving by what they're saying. They're painting a picture of a future that may be prophesying lies to you in my name, for I have not sent them. So the diviners could be giving them all kinds of hope, telling them, Israel's on the rise, don't give in. And they have this message that they're bringing out, but it has nothing at all to do with God's message. God's saying, in fact, who's the one that's encouraging them to give them these dreams? It's the people themselves. He says, don't listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. Why? Because people want to hear what they want to hear. And I'm going to gather people around me to tell me what I want to hear. But does that necessarily mean that those are the words that are coming from the mouth of God? Does that really necessarily mean that just because they have a picture of what they think reality ought to be, that overrides God's reality? No. God is absolutely sovereign here. If you go all the way back to verse 4 of Jeremiah 29, doesn't it say, this is the letter that the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. So yes, Babylon came in and they engaged in this warfare and they took them out. But it's God who allowed it all to happen. God's sovereignty, God's will is never in question, or his power is never in question. People may question God's methods, but God is still in charge here. He's saying, I am the one who allowed this to happen. Why? Because he's been telling them over and over again, because they had broken covenant with him. They had become just like the people around him. God had much different plans for the nation of Israel and for his people. So when you get back to verse 9 now, he says, they're prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them. So this is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my gracious promise to bring you back to this place. So God is now setting a time schedule. God's saying 70 years from now, you're going to be back in your land. That's what God is saying. It's not the prophesying of lies about, or whatever it is that these prophets were trying to, sway the people with. No, God is now going on record saying that this exile is going to last for 70 years. And then I'm going to come to you and fulfill my promise to bring you back into this land. You know how he's going to do that? He's going to do that because in 70 years, the Persians are going to rise up and they're going to defeat the Babylonians. And while the Babylonians, their foreign policy was if they invaded you, they were going to take all the inhabitants and scatter them throughout their kingdom, right? So kind of dilute the masses and perhaps their influence. Persia had the opposite. Persia said, listen, when Persia came into power, it was then that they allowed the people to go back. Now they would tax them, and they would have to pay, tribute back to Persia, but they were allowed to go back into their land. And we read then the stories of Ezra and Nehemiah, of Haggai, Zephaniah. See, these are all the prophets now that are post-exile. So what we're having here now is God giving them a promise in the midst of all of this, annihilation. So God's speaking a word to them of hope in the midst of what is terrible. And this is then where we get our famous verse from verse 11, where he says, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. See, God is giving them a promise. And he's saying, listen, I know what I have in store for you. And my plans are to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you a hope and a future. But there are some lessons that you're going to have to learn. And it's going to take these 70 years for all of this to come back. So if you are let's say you're an adult, you're in your 30s. You're looking at coming back when you're over 100, if you live so long. So who is going to come back into this land? Chances are, if you've been carried off into exile, the vast majority of those people are going to die in exile. But it's going to be their kids that are going to come back. And maybe there's going to be some, because we read in Ezra that some of the old timers, they came, so maybe they were teenagers when they left, and now they're seniors when they're coming back. And what they're going to come back to is, absolute destruction, right? The land is not going to be, used, and the city has not been rebuilt. I think of those poor people, in Gaza or, Ukraine, and you look at what's happened to their cities and their homes. There's a major building projects that are going to have to take place again. A whole generation of people lost. But God always has the end in view here. He's saying, listen, I know the plans I have for you, not to harm you, but plans to give you a hope and a future. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. Remember, it wasn't too long ago, God says, don't pray because I'm not listening. You've already turned your back. You have refused. You have refused me. You have refused my prophets. You have refused my word. You have refused the covenant that I made with you. You've rejected it all. So I'm not listening. Judgment is coming. And now God's saying, listen, call upon me. Pray. I will listen. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, and will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. Well, my friends, we're at a time this morning, but I hope you recognize that in these passages here in Jeremiah 29, even when they were carried off to exile, God still brings hope. God is the one who still holds the future. And he's saying that future for you is not to harm you, but to prosper you, right? To give you hope. And the path is found. He says, you will seek me and find me when you seek for me with all of your heart. That, my friends, is always the pathway to knowing God's will and God's purpose. So no matter where we are, even living in the days in which we are now, God says, turn to me, pray to me. I will listen, and you will seek me and find me when you seek for me with all of your heart. My friends, that advice never grows old. So go out, seize the day, and never forget that God is good. We'll continue our study in this exile to Babylon, Lord willing, tomorrow. So God bless you. Sorry for the delay this morning, but I have no control over technology. God bless you, my friends. Have a great day.